I'm leading a life of waiting for nothing in particular, except the end of it all. I have no incentive, no ambition, but to go on with as little friction as possible. Why did God not make us with ball bearings like bicycles? I fancy most observers would say that I'm having a pretty good time, and that's what I usually say myself. But may heaven punish the malefactor who invented that deathly dull thing, a good time.
Sinner, Saint, Hero, Wretch. A portrait of Ambrose Bierce, compiled and presented by Brian Sibley, with Robert Beatty as Ambrose Bierce.
Washington, D.C., September the 10th, 1913. My dear friend, I expect to go across South America, possibly via Mexico, if I can get through without being stood up against a wall and shot. But that's better than dying in bed, is it not? God bless and keep you, Ambrose. September the 13th, 1913. I go to Mexico with a pretty definite purpose, which, however, is not at present disclosable. You must forgive my obstinacy in not perishing where I am. I want to be where something worthwhile is going on, or where nothing whatever is going on. Most of what is going on in my own country is exceedingly distasteful to me. Pray for me? Why, yes, that will not harm either of us. May you live as long as you want to, and then pass smilingly into the good darkness. Devotedly your friend, Ambrose.
Days later, he passed into the good darkness, or at any rate disappeared into revolution-torn Mexico, never to be heard from again. Exactly what became of him was for many years the subject of rumour and speculation, but Bierce did not suddenly become an enigma. He had always been one.
Ambrose Bierce is as interesting as a kangaroo.
He has the kick of a zebra mule. He is a man of silent generosities, a fellow of tenderness.
A sadomasochist.
A childlike person. A hideous monster, so like the mixture of dragon, lizard, bat, and snake as to be unnameable.
The serpent's head was thrust flatly forth from the innermost coil, and rested upon the outermost. The definition of the wide, brutal jaw and the idiot-like forehead served to show the direction of its malevolent gaze. The luminous points of light that were its eyes were filled with malign significance. Was it venomous? Was it a constrictor? He reached under the bed, pulled it out, and flung it, still coiled, to the center of the room. With a harsh, shuffling sound, it slid across the polished floor until it stopped by the wall, where it lay without motion.
Bierce was a death man, a denier of life, of a genuine but slight talent.
It was a stuffed snake. Its eyes were 2 shoe buttons.
At 71, Ambrose Bierce was an impressive figure, with a youthful, ruddy complexion, a mane of silver hair, and clear, blue, penetrating eyes. He was universally acknowledged as America's greatest living writer, and although he once reviewed another writer's work with the stinging condemnation,
"The covers of this book are too far apart,"
his own collected writings ran to some 4 million words in 12 volumes. Ambrose Bierce was a household name, even among those who had read little or nothing of his work. A name synonymous with cynicism, sarcasm, and satire. A reputation, perhaps, that finally drove him in search of oblivion.
Oblivion, that eternal dumping ground for fame and cold storage for high hopes. A place where ambitious authors meet their works without pride and their betters without envy. Oblivion, a dormitory without an alarm clock.
And a euphemism for death. Death, says a character in one of Bierce's short stories, is a dignitary who, when he comes, is to be received with formal manifestations of respect, even by those most familiar with him.
If a man were locked up all night with a corpse, alone in a dark room, with no bed covers to pull over his head, and lived through it without going altogether mad, he might justly boast himself not of woman born.
Under the sheet, the outlines of the body could be traced, even the features, these having that unnaturally sharp definition which seems to belong to faces of the dead, but is really characteristic of those only that have been wasted by disease. Lifting the candle from its socket, he looked at it critically, as if calculating how long it would last. It was barely 2 inches long. In another hour he would be in darkness. Taking one final look at the corpse, he replaced the candle in the candlestick and blew it out.
Did it ever strike you that it must be a particularly pleasant thing to be dead? Here you are, lying comfortably on your back, what is left of it, in the cool dark and with the smell of fresh earth all about you, while your soul goes knocking about amongst an infinity of shadowy things, Lord knows where, making all sorts of silent discoveries in the gloom of what was yesterday, an unknown and mysterious future.
Nobody knows for sure when Ambrose Bierce eventually passed into that infinity of shadowy things. He was in Chihuahua on the 16th of December, 1913, after which nothing is known of him for certain. One account said that he joined the Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa and fought alongside him at the Battle of Ojinaga. According to another account, Bierce was captured on the trail to Monterrey and shot by a firing squad at Icamoli. One Edward O'Reilly confidently reported having seen Bierce's grave near Sierra Mahatha, while a Colonel Henry Mason, with equal confidence, reported having seen Bierce alive and well with Kitchener's forces in Europe. Bierce once wrote, "When death comes cloaked in mystery, he is terrible indeed." And in time the mystery of Bierce's disappearance became the sole substance of his fame.
My, how my fame rings out in every zone, 1,000 critics shouting, "He's unknown."
The man who penned 100 biting obituaries to others was never the subject of an obituary himself. There could be no epitaph for Ambrose Bierce.
What is an epitaph but a monumental inscription to remind the deceased of what he might have been?
Marcus Aurelius and Laura Bierce had 10 children: Abigail, Amelia, Anne, Addison, Aurelius, Almeda, Andrew, Albert, Augustus, and on June the 24th, 1842, Ambrose Gwinnett. A rival editor later hazarded the opinion that AG actually stood for Almighty God. Bierce was born in Meigs County, Ohio, or as some accounts of his life have it, in Guernsey County.
More than half a century ago, in Guernsey County, Ohio, there is said to have been a heavy shower of stones that caused many to believe that the world was coming to an end. I fancy that this is what gave the impression that I had been born in Guernsey County, it having been assumed that when God was throwing stones, I would be the natural target.
Ambrose's father was a self-educated man.
Education is that which discloses to the wise and disguises from the foolish their lack of understanding.
But the elder Bierce set greater store by his library than by his unsuccessful farm at Walnut Creek, Indiana.
With what anguish of mind I remember my childhood, recalled in the light of a knowledge since gained. The malarious farm, the wet fungus-grown wildwood, the chills then contracted, that since have remained.
As he grew up, Ambrose passed his days in prosaic employment, labouring in a brickyard or mopping up vomit in the local saloon. But at night he dreamt wild, dark, prophetic dreams.
Enclosed in the root of a great decayed tree was a slab of stone. Its edges were worn round, its corners eaten away, its surface deeply furrowed and scaled. Glittering particles of mica were visible in the earth about it, vestiges of its decomposition. This stone had apparently marked the grave out of which the tree had sprung years ago. The tree's exacting roots had robbed the grave and made the stone a prisoner. a sudden wind pushed some dry leaves and twigs from the uppermost face of the stone. I saw the low relief letters of an inscription and bent to read it. God in heaven, my name in full, the date of my birth, the date of my death.
At 15, he left home for Warsaw, Indiana, and a job as a printer's devil on the newly formed Northern Indiana newspaper.
Newspapers are conducted by rogues and dunces, for dunces and rogues. They fetter the feet of wisdom and stiffen the prejudices of the ignorant. They are sycophants to the mob, tyrants to the individual.
2 years later, in 1859, he temporarily left the newspaper world when a benevolent uncle, General Lucius Bierce, paid for his 17-year-old nephew to attend the Kentucky Military Institute.
I enjoyed my year at Kentucky, although I found cadets the most terrifying of creatures, in that it is their hope that in 10 years or so they will be shaking the world and cutting the throats of nations.
Then, with the outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861, Bierce enlisted in the Union Army as a private in the 9th Indiana Volunteers.
Why, oh, why is it that the reasons for war always seem so gloriously noble at the time?
One sunny autumn afternoon, a child strayed away from its home in a small field and entered a forest unobserved. The child was a boy, aged about 6 years, the son of a poor planter who had been a soldier once, and in whom the warrior fire survived. The man loved military books and pictures, and the boy had understood enough to make himself a wooden sword. This weapon he now bore bravely, as became the son of an heroic race, and pausing now and again in the sunny spaces of the forest, assumed with some exaggeration the postures of aggression and defense that he had been taught by the engraver's art.
War is the most dreadful byproduct of the arts of peace. He loves to come like a thief in the night, and professions of eternal amity provide the night.
His first enlistment ended after a brief summer of campaigning among the enchanted forests and purple valleys of West Virginia.
How romantic it was, the sunset valleys full of visible sleep, the glades suffused and interpenetrated with moonlight, the long valley of the green briar stretching away to we knew not what silent cities, the river itself unseen under its astral body of mist.
The 9th returned to muster out and reorganize. Ambrose was just 19 when he re-enlisted. He was made a sergeant, and by the time his unit returned to action, he had been promoted to the rank of sergeant major. He was also in love.
Love? Love is the idiotic folly of thinking much of another before you know anything of yourself.
She was called Bernie Wright. They had met while Ambrose was working in a store in Elkhart during the year following his military training. Ambrose called her Fatima.
Fatima is divine, for I have kissed her twice, and she is surely mine.
Throughout the bitter winter campaigns of 1862 and 63, Bierce continued the courtship by letter, and they eventually became engaged. At the same time, he was writing romantic letters to her sister. Allegedly, however, neither lady was his first love.
His first mistress seems to have been a woman of broad culture. To her, Bierce undoubtedly owed a debt of gratitude. He paid it off in passionate love. She instilled in him a love of literature, art, and the humanities generally. He assured me from time to time that he continued to think of her, and sometimes believed that she was the only woman he had truly loved. She was well past 70 when Bierce acquired her, and when this intimacy began, he was probably 15.
With copulation, as with other sensual gratifications, the edge of pleasure is blunted by use, until finally no edge is left.
And so too it proved with war.
I obtained leave to visit a ravine where a company of soldiers had been surrounded and, refusing to surrender, had been shot to the man. The woods had caught fire, and the bodies had been cremated. They lay half buried in ashes, some in the unlovely looseness of attitude denoting sudden death by the bullet, but by far the greater number in postures of agony that told of the tormenting flames. Some were swollen to double girth, others shriveled to mannequins. Their faces were bloated and black, or yellow and shrunken. The contraction of muscles had given them claws for hands, and cursed each countenance with a hideous grin.
Suddenly, the child with the wooden sword saw a strange creature moving towards him through the woods of Chickamauga. It was a man, and as he turned his face towards the child, the boy saw with horror that the man lacked a lower jaw. From the upper teeth to the throat was a great red gap, fringed with hanging shreds of flesh and splinters of bone. The unnatural prominence of the nose, the absence of chin, the fierce eyes, gave this man the appearance of a great bird of prey, crimsoned in the throat and breast by the blood of its quarry.
Bierce served 4 years in the Civil War, was twice wounded, once shot in the head, and was cited for bravery 15 times. He applied for a discharge in 1864, and for reasons undisclosed, ended his relationship with Fatima.
A woman in love is like a pig, which, having firm ground to stand upon, roots it up, and if cast into deep water, cuts its throat with its toes.
He applied for a commission with the regular army, and while awaiting appointment, joined General Hazen on a mapping expedition into the far west. He made the trip through West Dakota and Montana, as he described it, tipsy with youth. He was captivated by the beauty of the Shoshone Falls, swam the Yellowstone, and copied the prehistoric Indian drawings on the cliffs of Powder River. He responded to the vast, raw beauty of his native land, much as Jack London was to do. It was a land just big enough to contain a man who showed little willingness to be contained elsewhere.
Bierce was a man of great physical beauty, and so he remained until the day of his death. About 1 inch under 6 feet in height, his weight probably about 168 pounds, he was compactly built without surplus flesh. He was muscular, lithe, and appeared to possess the body of an athlete at the peak of training. His hair was a golden yellow, his eyes were light blue, and the color of his skin a ruddy, healthy pink, almost girlish in its tones. His brow was high, broad, and impressive.
In 1867, Bierce arrived in San Francisco, where his army commission awaited him. He had expected a captaincy, but was offered only the rank of second lieutenant. Insulted, he refused the commission, and decided instead to become a writer, and there was nowhere better to achieve that ambition than San Francisco.
The very air is pregnant with magnetism of bold, spirited, unwearied action. And he who but ventures into the outer circle of the whirlpool is spinning ere he has time for thought in its dizzy vortex.
San Francisco, scourged by wind, racked by fogs, scintillant with dusty motes in the cold sunshine. The gold rush town that was still in uproar, still teeming with life, where in 1867 the journalist might yet find fame and fortune. The boy poet Charlie Stoddard had just published a collection of verse. Prentice Mulford had of late come down from the mines to write of ghosts, and Mark Twain had just leapt to fame with the celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. Taking a job as a night watchman in the U.S. Mint, Bierce used what spare time he had to teach himself the rudiments of the writer's craft.
The writer should so write that his reader not only may, but must understand.
His first essays and poems appeared in San Francisco's local newspapers. Then, in 1868, he joined the Newsletter and began writing its satirical Town Crier column.
Hear the crier!
What the devil art thou?
One that will play the devil, sir, with you.
A morning paper says 3 unclaimed gold watches are in the hands of the police, and that it is not definitely known who stole them. Now they are in the hands of the police, however, it is definitely known who will steal them.
An Episcopal clergyman is endeavoring to prove that there are no essential points of difference between the Catholic and Protestant churches. Nor are there, except in the trifling matter of doctrine.
A man, 97 years of age, has just died in the state of New York. It is said that he had conversed with both President Washington and President Grant. If there were any further cause of death, it is not known.
Governor Walker of Virginia is inaugurated. There. That's the last we'll hear of him until he's arrested for stealing.
A witticism, Bierce once said, is a sharp and clever remark, usually quoted and seldom noted, what the Philistine is pleased to call a joke. Elsewhere he referred to wit as the salt with which the American writer spoils his intellectual cookery, by leaving it out. And Bierce's penetrating line in invective soon marked him out as a wit rather than a humorist.
Humor is Charles Dickens. Wit is Alexander Pope. Humor is Dogberry. Wit is Mercutio. Humor is tolerant and tender. It's ridicule careless. Wit stabs, begs pardon, and then turns the weapon in a wound. Humor is a sweet wine. Wit a dry, and we all know which is preferred by the connoisseur.
A connoisseur is a specialist who knows everything about something and nothing about anything else.
Curious, then, that Bierce should have been so repelled by that other connoisseur of wit, Oscar Wilde.
Wilde is a gonky-gonk, an ineffable dunce, and an intellectual jellyfish. He is a bore with an opulence of twaddle and a penury of sense. He has not even the grace to borrow something interesting. Oscar Wilde has nothing to say, and says it.
In 1871, Bierce married Mary Day, the daughter of a prosperous gold miner, and discovered the truth of his own remark that the trouble with women is that they never fall into your arms without remaining on your hands.
The normal, healthy human being is by nature polygamous, from the beginning of puberty until the youth of his middle age, and only by the sternest discipline, however imposed, can he be forced to keep within the bounds of monogamy.
We stood before the altar and supplied the fire ourselves in which our fat was fried. In vain the sacrifice. No god will claim an offering burnt with an unholy flame.
Mr. Day gave his daughter and her husband a visit to Europe for a wedding present, and Bierce left the newsletter.
Newsletter so fierce has lost his Bierce and doesn't know where to find him. Left all alone, he must weep and groan and tuck in his tail behind him.
Gentlemen, a large and comprehensive farewell. Be as decent as you can. Don't believe without evidence. Treat things divine with marked respect. Don't have anything to do with them. Do not trust humanity without collateral security. Remember that it hurts no one to be treated as an enemy entitled to respect until he shall prove himself a friend worthy of affection. Cultivate a taste for distasteful truths. And finally, and most important of all, endeavor to see things as they are, not as they ought to be.
In London he met Mark Twain, Tennyson, W.S. Gilbert, and Tom Hood the Younger, and was greatly stimulated by the conversation of writers who were his equals and his betters.
We commonly passed the entire night, sipping grog, pulling at our pipes, and talking of all manner of things.
Bierce was in his element.
A publisher is a person who drinks champagne out of the skulls of authors.
The face of a pig is more handsome than the face of a man, in the pig's opinion. And a pig's opinion upon this question is as likely to be correct as is a man's.
Those who are horrified at Mr. Darwin's theory of evolution may comfort themselves with the assurance that if we are descended from the ape, we have not descended so far as to preclude all hope of return.
Bierce wrote a regular column for Figaro as The Passing Showman, and contributed to the magazine Fun a series of obscure fables purporting to be written by Zambri the Parsee. These were later collected as Cobwebs from an Empty Skull, and were said to have been translated by one Dodd Gryle. An anagram, perhaps, of God Riled? Well, certainly that would be in keeping with Bierce's satanic reputation, a reputation strengthened by the publication of The Fiend's Delight, the title page of which was decorated with a drawing, possibly by W.S. Gilbert, of a devil roasting a human victim over burning coals.
When Dr. Charles O'Donnell died, they sank a box with him inside. The plate with his initials 3 was simply graven C.O.D. That night, 2 demons of the pit adown the coal hole shunted it. 10 million leagues it fell, alighting at the gates of hell. Nick looked upon it with surprise, a night storm darkening his eyes. "They've sent this rubbish, C.O.D. I'll never pay a cent," said he.
In 1875, after 3.5 years in England, the Bierces returned home. A son, Day, had been born to his wife, and she was again pregnant. Back in San Francisco, Bierce was offered a job by Frank Pixley on the newly founded Argonaut, and set about re-establishing his reputation as San Francisco's wickedest man. The Frisco climate proving bad for his asthma, he lived most of his time in the hill towns surrounding the city. As a result, although many read his words, few met him, and those who smarted under his attacks tended to feed the myths that grew up around the man.
It is common knowledge that Ambrose Bierce sleeps in cemeteries.
He exhumes cadavers.
He spends long hours in morgues studying the features of the dead.
He has an inhuman affection for reptiles, but is fearfully afraid of dogs.
He set his shoulder against the door with such force that it gave way. On the floor, near the disordered bed, in his nightclothes, lay Fleming, gasping away his life. Raising the dead man's head from the floor, he observed a wound in the throat. "I should have thought of this," he said, believing it suicide. When the man was dead, an examination disclosed the unmistakable marks of a dog's fangs deeply sunken into the jugular vein. But there was no animal.
I lay one happy night in bed and dreamed that all the dogs were dead. They'd all been taken out and shot. Their bodies strewed each vacant lot.
Bierce was an anachronism, a man who was intellectually and morally out of joint with his age. As a result, he was also a promise for the future of American literature. One particular craft, the short story, he made uniquely his own. In perhaps the most famous of them, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, a man who's about to be hanged has a miraculous escape when the rope breaks under the strain of the drop, or so we are led to believe, until it is revealed that the adventures related are in fact nothing more than the delirious fantasies that crowd into the man's brain between falling and the breaking of his neck. In The Boarded Window, a simple backwoodsman, believing his wife to be dead, binds her hands and prepares her body for burial. But that night...
By the flash of his discharging rifle, he saw an enormous panther dragging the dead woman towards the window, its teeth fixed in her throat. He fetched a light and found the body near the window where the beast had left it when frightened away by the flash and report. The clothing was deranged, the long hair in disorder, the limbs lay anyhow. From the throat, dreadfully lacerated, had issued a pool of blood not yet coagulated. The ribbon with which he had bound the wrists was broken, the hands were tightly clenched. Between the teeth was a fragment of the animal's ear.
Under the name of William Herman, Bierce wrote The Dance of Death, an attack on the lasciviousness of the waltz. Clergymen, failing to see that it was a spoof, rushed to endorse its philosophy. The book sold 18,000 copies in 6 months, despite at least one damning review.
The Dance of Death is a high-handed outrage, a criminal assault upon public modesty, an indecent exposure of the author's mind. From cover to cover, it is one sustained orgasm of a fevered imagination, a long revel of intoxicated propensities.
No prizes for guessing who that reviewer was. Bierce continued to work on the Argonaut until 1879, when a disagreement arose between the editor and his columnist. Pixley accused Bierce of breaking his contract, and Bierce accused Pixley of lying.
Obituary. Here lies Frank Pixley, as usual.
Bierce left the Argonaut and journalism in general for a while and went to join the 1880 gold rush as a mine manager in the Black Hills of Dakota.
Gold is a yellow metal greatly prized for its convenience in the various kinds of robbery known as trade. The word was formerly spelled G-O-D. The L was inserted to distinguish it from the name of another and inferior deity.
But the Black Hills gold rush came to nothing, and back in San Francisco he took over the editorship of a failing magazine, The Wasp. In 1881, under the often-used pseudonym Prattle, he resurrected an earlier work, The Demon's Dictionary, this time under the title Webster's Improved Dictionary.
Perdition. Noun. The loss of one's soul. Also the place in which it can be found.
Pleasure, noun, an emotion engendered by something advantageous to oneself or disastrous to others.
Pluck, noun, acknowledging that you are a coward.
25 years later, in 1906, the lexicon appeared in book form as The Cynic's Word Book, but it was to be a few years more before it was to be republished with its proper satanic associations as The Devil's Dictionary. In many ways it is Bierce's finest achievement, since, unlike much of his other writing, its wit is not concerned with the crucifixion of long-forgotten adversaries.
Barbara. A savage whose laceration of your cheek is unobserved in the superior torment of his conversation.
Circus, a place where horses, ponies, and elephants are permitted to see men, women, and children acting the fool.
Dice, small polka-dotted cubes of ivory constructed like a lawyer, to lie on any side, but commonly on the wrong one.
Frog, a reptile with edible legs.
Novel. A short story padded.
Gas meter, a liar in the family basement.
One day in 1886, Bierce received a visitor at his Oakland apartment.
When I opened the door, I found a young man, the youngest young man it seemed to me that I had ever confronted. His appearance, his attitude, his manner, his entire personality suggested extreme diffidence. I did not ask him in, install him in my better chair. I did have to, and inquire how we could serve each other. If my memory is not at fault, I merely said, "Well," and waited the result. "I am from the San Francisco Examiner," he explained in a voice like the fragrance of violets made audible, and backed a little away. "Oh," I said, "you come from Mr. William Randolph Hearst." Then that unearthly child lifted his blue eyes and cooed, "I am Mr. Hearst."
20 years of what Hearst's newspaper was to call wage slavery ensued. But it was a slavery that led to public success, even though that success was to be counterpointed by private unhappiness. Over the years, friction had built up between Bierce and his wife. There had been tension over the bringing up of their children. Bierce allowed, even encouraged them to be rebellious. He openly applauded his sons, Day and Lee, for refusing to go to Sunday school, and only permitted his daughter Helen to attend church under sufferance.
I think God is perhaps less concerned about his popularity than some good folks seem to suppose.
In many ways he was unsuited to matrimony. It was a check on his freedom.
We shall continue to have marriage, and its Dead Sea fruits will grow no riper and sweeter with time. But the lie which describes them as luscious and gratifying is needless.
The couple split up in 1888, but the breakdown of the marriage was a minor tragedy compared with the loss of both their sons. Day committed suicide after killing the rival suitor of some 16-year-old girl in Chicago, and his brother Lee died of pneumonia in New York.
Child, an accident to which all the forces and arrangements of nature are specially devised and accurately adapted.
Bierce was almost 50. His reputation had never been greater, and his creative writing never more polished. He still wrote every word in longhand with a quill pen, a weapon he once described as
an implement of torture yielded by a goose and wielded by an ass.
He attracted a coterie of disciples to whom he became mentor, master, and frequently an opinionated and dogmatic teacher.
It is needful that the writer should know and have an ever-present consciousness that this is a world of fools and rogues, blind with superstition, false, cruel, cursed with illusions, frothing mad. He must be a sinner and, in turn, a saint, a hero, and a wretch.
Among the works he published were a collection of Civil War stories, tales of soldiers and civilians, a book of horror fantasies, Can Such Things Be?, and a book of fantastic fables subtitled Old Sores with New Teeth.
A spendthrift, seeing a single swallow, pawned his cloak, thinking that summer was at hand. It was.
Then there was a book on grammar, Write It Right. Several collections of essays and verses, including Black Beetles in Amber, Shapes of Clay, and The Shadow on the Dial, and epigrams and aphorisms beyond number.
If cleanliness is next to godliness, then it is a matter of unceasing wonder that, having gone to the extreme limit of the former, so many people manage to stop short exactly at the line of demarcation.
Immoral is the solemn judgment of the stalled ox upon the sun-inspired lamb.
The symbol of charity should be a circle. It usually ends exactly where it begins, at home.
The young writers of America accorded him their adulation and wrote at great length to him, for him, and about him. Bierce was famous, but
to be famous is to be conspicuously miserable.
He was also bored with life.
Life's not worth living, and that's the truth. Carelessly caroled the golden youth. In manhood still he maintained that view, and held it more strongly the older he grew. But when kicked by a jackass at 83, "Go fetch me a surgeon at once," cried he.
Bierce decided to take himself off on a quest.
The Olympia, Euclid Street, Washington, D.C., October the 1st, 1913. My dear friend, I go away tomorrow for a long time, so this is only to say goodbye. I think there is nothing else worth saying. Civilization be dinged, it's the mountains and the desert for me. So goodbye. If you hear of my being stood up against a Mexican stone wall and shot to rags, please know that I think that a pretty good way to depart this life. It beats old age, disease, or falling down the cellar stairs. To be a gringo in Mexico, that is euthanasia. Affectionately, Ambrose.
He left Washington, dressed for death, on the 10:10 train for Chattanooga on Thursday, October the 2nd, 1913. 3 days later, he was in Chickamauga.
Ridge beyond ridge, parted by purple valleys full of sleep. The element of enchantment in this region is supplied by my wandering and dreaming in it 51 years ago, when I was a-soldiering, and there were new things under a new sun. Unlike me, it has not visibly altered in all those years, except that I miss here and there a thin blue smoke from an enemy camp.
The child stood, wooden sword in hand, and looked down upon the body. The white face was turned upward, the hands thrown out and clutched full of grass. The greater part of the forehead was torn away, and from the jagged hole the brain protruded, overflowing the temple, a frothy mass of grey, crowned with clusters of crimson bubbles. The work of a shell.
I shall go and retrace my old routes and lines of march, stand in my old camps, inspect my battlefields, and see that all is right and undisturbed.
On October the 6th, he moved on to Nashville, and 6 days later left for Shiloh.
I can only now recall with difficulty the dangers, deaths, and horrors of that time. Ah, youth, there is no such wizard as thou. What I would have given for but one touch of thine artist hand upon the dull canvas of my later years. Had you gilded for but one moment their drear and somber scenes, I would willingly have surrendered another life than that one that I should have thrown away at Shiloh.
In New Orleans, he was beset by a severe attack of asthma, and it was in that city that a journalist sought him out and gave the world the master's last public words.
I'm on my way to Mexico because I like the game. I like the fighting. I want to see it. There's no family that I have to take care of. I've retired from writing, and I'm going to take a rest. My wants are few. There isn't much that I need. Well, don't you think after a man has worked as long as I have that he deserves a rest? There are many things that might happen between now and when I come back. My trip might take several years, and I'm an old man now.
On October the 27th, he arrived in San Antonio, Texas, in the teeth of a blizzard. He visited the Alamo. On November the 7th, he was seen in Laredo, and after visiting Fort McIntosh and the old Spanish settlement, he moved on to El Paso. Then on December the 16th,
I am in Chihuahua. The weather is sharp, but I'm enjoying life and this Jornada de Muerto, this journey of death. The roads are dotted with refugees. Troops leave here daily. Soon I hope to be in Torreon. There has been a little fighting. These Mexicans fight like devils, but it is unsoldierly, unseasonable fighting. I must tell you of an incident at Tierra Blanca. There was much speculation as to who this gringo was accompanying the army. Was he, they wanted to know, a soldier? To remove suspicion, I took a rifle, walked to the top of a ridge, took careful aim, and got my man. Elation! Such firing was unheard of. The old gringo was given a sombrero and questioned no more. It was enough that I had shot one of the enemy. Poor devil. I wonder who he was. I don't know where I shall be next. Guess it doesn't matter much. Adios, Ambrose.
he was never seen again.
Dream you he was afraid to live? Dream you he was afraid to die? Or that, a suppliant of the sky, he begged the gods to keep or give? Not thus the shadow-maker stood, whose scrutiny dissolved so well our thin mirage of heaven and hell, the doubtful evil, dubious good. If now his name be with the dead, and where the gaunt agaves flower, the vulture and the wolf devour the lion hearts, the lion head. Be sure that heart and head were laid in wisdom down, content to die. Be sure he faced the starless sky, unduped, unmurmuring, unafraid.
In 1912, on the publication of Bierce's collected works, an old friend, James T. Watkins, had sent him this message.
Probably you will derive only a meager spiritual consolation from the reflection that you are to become a classic, and that in time the test of a critic's acumen and fitness will be his attitude towards Ambrose Bierce.
Today, few critics' acumen could be judged by their attitude towards Ambrose Bierce. He is known only for a handful of brilliant short stories, for his Devil's Dictionary, and for his mysterious disappearance into that good, good darkness.
Done with the work of breathing, done with all the world, the mad race run through to the end. the golden goal attained, and found to be a hole.
Robert Beatty played Ambrose Bierce in Sinner, Saint, Hero, Wretch, compiled and presented by Brian Sibley, with John Bott, Anthony Hyde, and Alexander John. The program was directed by John Cardy.